Our gospel reading for this morning is, to many of us, a well-known parable from Luke's gospel. It's part of a trio of parables, two much shorter ones, the lost coin, the lost sheep, about how far God will go to bring the lost back in, and then this much longer, more developed one, usually known as the parable of the prodigal. Although many have pointed out that prodigal, while it's often applied to the younger son, is just as easily applied to the father in the parable. Listen for what the Spirit may speak to us through these words. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.'" This was never done, by the way. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder brother was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who had devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Just over a year ago, my wife Shawn and I traveled to Austin, Texas for the wedding of our daughter Kendrick and our now son-in-law, Ryan. In many ways, it was a wedding like most weddings, with bridesmaids and groomsmen and tuxes and dresses and family and friends gathered from here and there. If you've been involved in many weddings, you know that weddings often have their share of family dynamics and tuxes that don't fit right and frayed nerves. And in that sense, this wedding was probably fairly typical as well, although it all came off beautifully in the end. But when my father of the bride duties were all done at this particular wedding, it did, in my admittedly biased opinion, become something distinctive. I can't say exactly why, because it was a reception like a lot of other receptions, with a band and a bar and a dinner. But it somehow worked better than most I've been to. Perhaps it was just the right combination of food that was good, drink that was good, a band that was good, a venue that was good, and a great mix of family and friends from the various cities we've lived over the years. Whatever the reason, I don't know that I've ever enjoyed myself more. I ate, I drank, I mingled, I talked, I laughed, I danced, and I rarely dance. And I did not want the night to come to an end. And I think that experience gave me a little bit more appreciation for the way Jesus and the Bible use wedding banquets as metaphor for the kingdom, for God's reign. Wedding banquets were really big deals back in those days. Feasts that went on for a week. People pulled out all the stops when they had a wedding banquet. And in our parable today, when the father kills the fatted calf to celebrate his younger's return, he throws a party of wedding banquet dynamics, wedding banquet size. And so it's no wonder that the elder brother is upset, bringing a family dynamic of its own to this particular party. I'm not going if he's going. I've always loved the way this parable concludes with an exchange between the father and the elder son. The Presbyterian son, in Greek, he's the presbyteros son, the root of our denomination's name. The Presbyterian son has disowned his sibling, no longer his brother. So he yells at his father, "When this son of yours came back." But the father is not willing to let the family disintegrate so easily. And so he replies, "But we had to rejoice and celebrate because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life." Now, perhaps the elder brother would have been okay with his younger sibling returning under the plan that the younger brother himself first envisioned, working as a hired hand. But the father's great love will not allow that. And so the parable ends unresolved. The father outside his own party pleading with the elder to come in. The father in anguish seeking reconciliation among his children. A few years back, the book, novel I guess it was, called The Shack was all the rage, especially in church circles, and some of you may have read it. If you hadn't, it's a story about a fellow named Mackenzie, a middle-aged fellow who goes by the name of Mac, who receives a strange invitation to spend a weekend at a shack, the very place where a still at-large kidnapper had murdered his youngest daughter, a couple of years before. Initially, he assumes this is some sort of cruel hoax that he's received, but he gradually comes to believe that this is an invitation from God. And during the strange weekend that Max spends in this shack, he encounters a mysterious, beautiful woman with a long, flowing black robe like that judges wear. And she begins to discuss with Mac his hurt and his anger at his daughter's murder, his feelings of questions of how God could ever have allowed such a thing to happen. And as she does, Mac gets angrier and angrier, and the woman tells Mac that he is with her for judgment. He wonders just what it is he is to be judged for, and she tells them that he is the one who will be doing the judging. Mac thinks that a preposterous idea, but she says that he's well-versed and well-experienced, that you judge people all the time, don't you? And he has to admit that he does, and so he asks who he will be judging, and he is told God and the human race. He objects, of course, but she begins to prod him, saying, what about the people who pray, who feed on the poor of the world? What about them? What about the individual who preys on innocent young girls? What about him, Mac? Is he guilty? Does he deserve to be judged? Yes, screams Mac. Yes. The woman continues asking about the man's father, who twisted his son into a terror. How far back do we go, Mac? The legacy of brokenness goes all the way back to Adam. What about him? And God started it all. What about God? Is it God's fault? She continues in, and finally Mac screams, yes, it's God's fault. Well, since you can judge God, surely you can judge humanity. Mac, Mackenzie, you must select 2 of your children to spend eternity in God's new heaven and new earth, but only 2. Mac starts to object, but she continues, and you must choose 3 of your children to spend eternity in hell. Mac begins to panic, but the woman continues, I'm only asking you to do what you believe that God does with his own children. If God can so easily judge God's children, surely Mackenzie can judge his own, and one of them has been an absolute horror of late. She continues in on Mac, and he finally can't take it anymore. And he says, I can't, I won't. The woman just sits there looking at him, and he pleads, can I take their place? He falls down, pleading, please let me go in their place. And then it's over. The woman smiles and says, now you sound like Jesus. You have judged well, Mackenzie. I am so proud of you. When Jesus envisions a final end, he speaks of a wedding banquet, one many times more wonderful than my daughter's. But it also has a rather odd guest list. There are all sorts of people there I would not have invited. There are people there I do not like. There are people there I am certain do not deserve to be there. In fact, one of the big temptations for Presbyterian elder brother types is to say, I'm not going if they're going. I occasionally hear similar comments when I'm doing wedding planning with couples in my work as a pastor. When there has been a family history of betrayal, of divorce, of hurt, of other sorts of traumas, it can sometimes be very difficult to get everyone together. But weddings also can become times of reconciliation. And that is what God longs for. The father in our parable waits for reconciliation, pleads with the elder brother to come to the party. Reconciliation is what God plans. And the cross gives us a clear glimpse of how far God is willing to go to get there. God plans a beloved community where people come from east and west, from north and south, to sit at table in the kingdom. And the first ones in are the ne'er-do-wells and the folks we're sure don't belong on the guest list. And some of the Presbyterian elder brother types are kind of hanging around just outside, wondering whether or not to go in with those folks. And God beckons, reminding the people waiting outside, they are not those folks God invited. They are our brothers and sisters. And in the end, there's good food and good drink, and there's dancing to a great band, and there's laughter, and there's joy. In the meantime, we are called to help the world get ready. We are called to begin building God's beloved community, where even those we had not planned to invite find welcome. Where, by the mystery of God's love in Christ, we become more and more like the Father who throws the party. All praise and glory to the God whose love will stop at nothing to bring us all in to the final party. Thanks be to God.